Serial killers are very scary people with disturbing backstories. Most people cannot understand how the mind of a serial killer can relish in reliving such real-life horror stories over and over again. While some of these criminals are made famous through chilling interviews and other media coverage, the true story behind some of the worst serial killers on Earth remains strangely unknown. Here are 5 of the most evil cases on Earth you've never heard of before. Number 5. Like many of the more famous serial killers known today, Richard Cottingham did not seem like a very scary person. He was a computer operator recently separated from his wife, who he had 3 children with. His neighbors described him as private but a great father. He was apprehended in May of 1980 for an attack on an 18-year-old woman. Those who knew him were shocked. A look into this criminal mind would reveal a dark and disturbing individual. When not working with computers, Cottingham was taking the lives of women in New York and New Jersey. He earned nicknames like the Times Square Killer, but none of these titles did justice to just how scary of a person Cottingham was. It was 1980 when the serial killer was finally caught. On May 5th, a maid at a Quality Inn in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey, discovered the body of a woman named Valerie Ann Street while vacuuming under the bed. Valerie had been viciously attacked while in handcuffs and did not survive. On the 22nd of May, hotel workers were already apprehensive after the missing body of a young woman was found in one of the rooms a few weeks later. So when a maid heard a woman screaming in one of the rooms, they called police. At the center of the crime scene, officers found an 18-year-old woman, cuffed and covered in teeth marks among other afflictions, and Cottingham fled. He would go on to take one more life of Jean Rayner. The cuffs used in each case were fingerprinted, and investigators connected the serial killer to both crime scenes. At his residence, police found an apartment key from his first victim, which he kept as a keepsake. There was also a necklace belonging to Jean Rayner. By the time Cottingham went to trial the following year, he had been connected to other unsolved cases as well. Between 1977 and 1980, he took the lives of 5 women, including Valerie. The first had been Mary Ann Carr, who was found in the parking lot of the same hotel where Valerie's life had been taken. 2 more women had their lives taken on December 2nd, 1959. Firefighters were called to the Travel Inn Motel near Times Square. When they went into the burning room, they recovered the bodies of 2 women. One was later identified as Dida Gudarzi. The other was unrecognizable. Cottingham was found guilty for these twisted crimes, as well as attacks on others, each with horrifying survivor stories telling of similar serial killer encounters. It wouldn't be until decades later that more cases were solved with Cottingham's help. In police interviews, the serial killer admitted to 6 other unsolved cases in the New York and New Jersey areas between 2010 and 2021. He will remain behind bars for the rest of his life. Number 4. In February of 1984, police investigator Nikolai Ignatovich was assigned to solve a crime against a young woman in what was then the Soviet Union. She had met an unexpected ending at the side of the road. Her story matched dozens of other cases from the past decade. Though many of those cases had been officially solved, and men had been sentenced to lengthy prison terms, Nikolai theorized that a serial killer was on their hands, and he was right. It was the first time these crimes had been investigated as the work of a serial killer. Now looking at them all together, there was one clue that was used to track down the elusive criminal. In many of the cases, a red vehicle was seen near the scene of the crime. Using this as a starting point, investigators began to look into all the owners of similar vehicles in the area. It was still a long list of suspects to go through, and a number of volunteer police officers joined the search for the serial killer. In the meantime, more women fell victim to the criminal. His modus operandi seemed to be using a scarf or similar object, though he would sometimes use other materials such as a cord made of rye. These tools were later found at the side of the road or else in a more secluded area. In 1985, a letter was sent to the local newspaper. The anonymous writer called for members to take the lives of communists. Investigators now knew what the criminal handwriting looked like. To solve the mystery, they needed handwriting samples from all owners of similar red vehicles that matched the one at the crime scene. When investigating one such car owner at a local auto repair shop, they found their serial killer. Gennady Makasevic was a worker at the shop and a volunteer police officer. He was a family man who had even helped in the criminal investigation, using his role as a volunteer police officer to make sure the mystery went unsolved. Makasevic started his spree in 1971 after returning from the army to find his wife with another man. From that point on, he juggled his ordinary life with his work as a serial killer, usually by picking up hitchhikers. Sometimes he would take jewelry or other objects from their bodies as sick souvenirs. On at least one occasion, he gave an item of jewelry stolen from one of his victims to his wife as a present. He had tried to throw off investigators with the mysterious letters, but the serial killer made a criminal confession on file during an interview not long after his 1985 arrest. Number 3. The Skid Row slasher became active in 1964. David Russell and Benjamin Hornberg had both been attacked by a then unidentified man carrying a sharp object. The two crimes had been committed just hours apart. It looked like the beginning of a serial killer's spree, but the crimes stopped as soon as they had started. Almost exactly a decade later, on December 1st, 1974, he would take a third life. Charles Jackson was attacked on Skid Row, almost the exact same spot as David Russell years earlier, with a sharp object multiple times. Salt was sprinkled around his body, and strange marks were carved into him. A week later, another man was attacked in a similar fashion. By the end of the month, the Skid Row slasher claimed 2 more. Investigators now believed that they knew what this serial killer looked like. He was white, 6 feet tall with long blonde hair. He was described as a loner with an abnormal physical characteristic that has never been made public. Most of his victims up until this point had been drifters, and police believe the serial killer saw himself in them, and that made him angry. As forensic investigators chased after this mysterious and scary individual, the serial killer took the lives of 2 more people. He then moved away from Skid Row. 3 more bodies were all found in Hollywood, but police were able to connect them to the crime scene because of how they were attacked. On February 2nd, 1975, police responded to a house break-in. Someone had broken into the house of William Graham in Hollywood and tried to end his life. Little did he know that he was outnumbered because a guest was staying that night. The suspect fled the scene on foot, and as he did, he dropped a mysterious letter addressed to himself. The letter brought police to a man named Vaughn Greenwood's home, but they didn't suspect him of anything other than breaking into William's home and attacking him. The Skid Row slasher was believed to be Caucasian and had some kind of visible condition that, again, was never released to the public, possibly as a way for police to verify the legitimacy of survivor stories. Greenwood was African American with no physical abnormalities to speak of. But in his home, they found trophies belonging to his victims, including a pair of cufflinks. Greenwood also had a criminal record. In 1966, he had attacked a man with a bladed weapon after demanding money from him. The man had survived, and Greenwood wound up in prison for the attack. It explained the gap between the first 2 slashings and the rest of his serial spree. He was found guilty of taking the lives of 9 people, and with the true story behind each of the mysterious cases fully solved, he spent the rest of his life behind bars. Number 2. Herbert Mullen had one of the creepiest criminal motives for becoming a serial killer, because to him, what he was doing was not criminal at all, but rather an evil most necessary. In 1972, the scary serial killer-to-be became highly convinced of a major earthquake in his home of North California. The only way to prevent this event was, unexplainably, for him to take lives. Mullen was convinced of this premonition because the day he was born was also the day of a devastating San Francisco earthquake. Between this strange historical coincidence and warnings from a mathematician that the big earthquake would hit the following year, Mullen became convinced that some great natural disaster was going to take place if he didn't become a serial killer to stop it. For years, Mullen had been experiencing stress-induced delusions after his best friend passed away after a road mishap. His hallucinations had centered around fears of a great earthquake, and Mullen soon heard voices telling him to go through with the plan. According to Mullen, he could inexplicably communicate telepathically with those who he attacked, and they knowingly offered up their lives to help stop the earthquake. The first was a homeless man named Lawrence White. On October 13, 1972, Mullen spotted him walking at the side of the road. Mullen stopped the car and pretended to have engine problems. When Lawrence came over to try to help him, the serial killer attacked. About a week later, Mary Guilfoyle was hitchhiking when she met Mullen. It was weeks before her remains were found on the side of the road. Over the next few months, Mullen claimed 11 more lives using a number of different instruments, each time hallucinating their telepathic consent beforehand. The serial killer remained on the loose until he was finally caught on February 13, 1973. He attacked a man named Fred Perez on the driveway of his home, in full view of the rest of the street. A neighbor witnessed the crime and was able to take down the license plate of Mullen's car before contacting police. Mullen had made multiple shocking criminal confessions as he explained to police investigators exactly why he felt the need to become a serial killer. The interview, remarkably, was not enough evidence for the jury to substantiate his claim of insanity. He was found guilty for taking the lives of all 10 of his victims. Number 1. As the horrors of the Second World War gripped most of Europe, one French doctor took advantage of the situation and became one of the most evil serial killers. Marcel Pottiot is not a well-known story outside of France, but his criminal actions made him one of the scariest people in history. Pottiot had many run-ins with the law throughout his life, and when he was still young, he was diagnosed with a number of mental health issues. The inside of his mind only got worse as World War I further delayed any medical treatment. It was a glimpse into the serial killer to be. Pottiot survived in the army, but continued to spend a lot of his time in the hospital for both mental and physical health reasons. He was eventually discharged due to his various instabilities, and it was recommended he stay in a mental hospital. As with many of the worst and most evil serial killers, he was a strong learner and quite determined. Instead, he joined a fast-track program for those leaving the army and earned a medical license. As a doctor with an unsettling backstory unknown to the public, Pottiot began his more disturbing crimes, opening a practice in 1921. It was here that Pottiot began his second career as a serial killer. Pottiot began an affair with a young woman named Louise Delaveau. Shortly after they began dating, Louise strangely vanished. A neighbor reported seeing Pottiot loading a heavy-looking container into his car. A similar-looking container was found submerged in a river a few weeks later, with the remains of an unidentified woman inside. Pottiot was never investigated, and Louise was ruled as a runaway. Her case was never officially solved. During this time, Pottiot grew his medical and political career as a charismatic serial killer. He was elected to a number of offices, despite the fact his kleptomania caused multiple run-ins with the law. He also would improperly prescribe medication to just about anyone, earning him a 2,400 franc fine. It was during the Second World War that the serial killer's most evil acts occurred. He was claimed to be a member of the French resistance and offered a route of escape for Jewish refugees and others fleeing German oppression. After a payment of what equates to $500,000 in today's money, Pottiot told them he could get them to Argentina. He told them they would need inoculations and then administered cyanide instead. Pozio was eventually caught when neighbors reported a strange smell coming from his home. Police discovered the den of a serial killer with the remains of more than a dozen people inside. Pozio tried to claim these were the bodies of Germans or traitors, but this wasn't believed by criminal investigators. The untrue story was a twisted glimpse into his dark and horrifying mind. Pozio was found guilty of taking the lives of 26 people, but as one of the most notorious serial killers in France, he's believed to be responsible for claiming many, many more. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knott, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.